Welcome back, folks. This is the video that I was referring to in the last two that I recorded. I wanted to share with you some of my thoughts around what has happened with the games, why skills are being influenced in some ways, and what some of the behaviors that we're seeing, or at least my theories on these. In the line group that I'm discussion and in discussion of these topics with my club mates, I frequently hear questions along the lines of, well, my pitcher seems to need to have a location rating of this or higher in order to be effective, or I need this level of velocity in order for him to be effective. So I wanted to share some thoughts on that, on how how ranked has progressed, and the state of the game right now. In order to do this properly, I have to set the stage a little bit. For some of you, this is going to be covering some stuff that you're already familiar with. For players who have joined the game after it was originally introduced at the end of 2016, some of this will be necessary to understand where I'm going with some of my thoughts. So, with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about where the game originated and where it's gone to. So, for those who didn't start right at the beginning, the game was released towards the end of 2016, and at that point in time, the game had players from 2015, 2016, and then shortly after, we saw 2013 and 2014 players added as well. At this point in time, you didn't typically see teams with just loaded with signature players, especially not team signature players, because they were introduced, towards the end of 2016, and A, you had to get lucky to land one on your team, and B, you didn't have as many chances to buy them. So any particular team might only have one or two. So you didn't see teams getting jacked up in their total OVR from the super strong team sig players and stacked teams. At that point in time, we didn't have prime players, and the top players for hitters, we were generally seeing like a 103 to 105 OVR was considered an excellent hitter, and for pitchers, you were in the 104 to 108 for the really good pitchers. So Kershaw obviously being on the top end of that. So it's important to understand when the game was initially released, OVRs in general were lower. With this in mind, I've plotted out what team growth might typically look like over time since the release of the game, and I would say this pretty accurately represents how my team progression has gone. Now, in reality, there would have been bubbles like with the introduction of like special training, there might have been a little jagged edge here, but on the whole, this does a pretty good job of representing how my team grew over time. Now, the one thing to point out here is you'll notice that you have pretty rapid growth in the beginning, and your OVR rises fairly quickly, and then you start to hit a plateau. And in this particular graph, right here is where we pass the point where we have what previously were the standard high-end players. And this is when we're starting to get into the realm of teams loaded with signatures and these types of things, drawing up the team OVR above what initially the game was released as. So part of my theory is that when Com2 designed the game, they anticipated that teams were probably going to be around this little yellow circle that I drew. That was going to be where they were going to start to top out in their OVR. And yet, what we've seen is as they introduce special training and everything else, things have progressed, and now we're up at this level, and teams hitting 112 OVR. And right now, mid 112s is kind of the top end right now. I don't think I've seen a 113 yet, but you get the idea. You see that things start to plateau. And this is going to be interesting when we start to take a look at comparing team growth in just a second. Okay, with these thoughts in mind, let's take a look at how ranked play is progressing right now and some of my thoughts on that. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I'm sure some of you have actually already had these thoughts, and some of you will think, oh, that's obvious or whatever. I'm just kind of putting it out there for other people who haven't had a chance to think of it or put things together. So with that in mind, let's move on. So let's say hypothetically I'm the red team here, and somebody out there might have joined at mid 2017 and worked just as hard as I did to build their team. They might be the yellow line. And with the progression the way it is, you can see that eventually you're going to converge. Now, you can't tell from this graph, but the yellow line actually does stay below the red line. Um, it just gets really close there at the end, and eventually they end up at more or less the same spot. So, what this kind of conveys is somebody who started early has a significant advantage in this area here until the point at which the yellow team has invested enough time and energy and they've caught up. And so, as far as that translates into what's going on with ranked play, you're going to see that, or as I've seen, I see more and more teams becoming competitive and showing up in the top levels of ranked, and essentially it's getting crowded up there. Of course, you can guess this has gotten pretty frustrated from the people who have started right from the very beginning. They've put a lot of time and energy in this to suddenly see all that effort to be competitive at the top ranks. Suddenly, there's all these other people who are beating them that are not used to having beating them, and it's just frustrating as it gets more crowded at the top. So people who started early are basically having less of an advantage than they did before because people have caught up. What once was sufficient to perform and be at the top of ranked is no longer adequate, and players that used to be showing up in the top 20 every week are being pushed out. Older players that maybe have better skills than on some of their players than the newer teams um, are finding that this advantage is disappearing slowly as people start to skill up their teams, and in some cases even surpass the old teams. So, and on top of this, if you take a somewhat competitive team and you add manual play on top of this, then now you're seeing teams that are able to boost what is a slightly less established team above some of the established team through ranked through manual play and jumping into the top 10 or whatever by pushing their team a little bit further. And so for all the people who are out there who don't like manual play or don't want to manual play, people who are doing this manual play are they're kind of annoying the sim players. Okay, so that all might have seemed pretty obvious. Let's move on to some more theories on actual player behavior, skills, etc. And in order to do that, a lot of this is based off of what I introduced last year is the concept of diminishing returns. So in order to really set the stage, I have to kind of revisit that topic. So let's go ahead and redefine that right now. So my theory is, from a game development standpoint or game design standpoint, that when Com2 put this game together, they designed the progression of players such that they would grow, but you couldn't grow them infinitely. So, in a linear progression, that would be infinite growth. A player, if you raised him up to, on the bottom axis here, 122i, and by the way, this is a very simplified view of if I was the only thing controlling batting average. Higher I equals higher batting average. We know this is not true. This is a simplified example. But nonetheless, if I had 122i in this example, you can see that I'm already approaching roughly 350 batting average. And if I could go higher than that, I would continue to raise higher, which, as we all know, starts to get to unreasonable levels. So I believe that Com2 designed the progression of the players and the game along something similar to the yellow line, where you would grow, but eventually at this level here, you start to plateau. And when you start to increase your I from 114 up to 122, you pretty much don't see any benefit from it. Okay, so this is a very important concept to understand and hopefully agree that it's probably in play in order for the rest of my theories to work out. So, assuming diminishing returns is in fact in play, It would affect your skills for your players in the following manner. First of all, you have to group them between what I call stat boosters versus performance changing type skills. Stat boosters being of the type that change your velocity or your various other ratings of the player, such as last boss, ace, cleaning up your mess for pitchers, and for hitters, charisma, legend, training junkie, etc. For these, basically what's going to happen is once you hit the top end of that curve, then suddenly they're going to become those skills are going to become less effective. So if you have on the previous slide somebody who was hitting or at OVR like 90, that person might see a much significant more significant return from legend for their hitting than a player who's already at 105 uh, eye level. So for the really top end players, you want to move away from things like ace or legend or training junkie and that type of thing, and move towards the other type of performance changers. Um, in general, charisma could potentially stay effective, and last boss would always remain effective because you could probably push yourself down on that curve a sufficient level. But nonetheless, the point being at top end, though, these types of skills become less effective. And whereas my theory is, and I can't officially prove this, but my theory is that the performance changers like batting machine, slugger's instinct, and untouchable at the top end will not see those diminishing returns. And so this translates into for the long term, in the end, batting machine, slugger's instinct, and untouchable should become and remain somewhat more reliable than the other ones if we see team OVR progressions continuing to go up. So based on the little history lesson I gave before and where we are today and the amount of time that's elapsed and the introduction of special training and signatures and these types of things, I am saying that the team averages have raised from a top end of maybe 105 for the top OVR teams up to the 112 level. As I know, I mean, my team is at that. So they have raised, and on average, I say that they have raised team averages or team OVRs have raised. And basically, Com2 has needed to do something about this. Now, I also believe there is a chance that they have implemented something called capped progression. And capped progression would look something like this. So here's the typical batting average progression that I showed you in the other one without the linear overlay. And you can see that basically it tops out, and this is just purely for example, above 340, okay? Might be the typical behavior you would see from a batter if you had raised his eye that level in my hypothetical environment. Now, there is a chance that when Com2 designed the game, they actually capped off. Instead of having it curve naturally here at the top, they might have capped it off at something like 330-ish and said, okay, anything above this, you've basically raised things too high. So in this example, anything above the 100 mark here, my screen's not drawing. Anyways, above the 100 mark would basically net you no additional returns. So this is another example for where legend and these types of things would be useless on this particular player. So I don't know whether or not this is an effect. I tend to think not, but there is a chance that we are seeing this. So in order to counteract this tendency for rising OVRs for teams and players, Com2 has needed to do something to prolong the progression of the game and allow top end teams and everything to continue to progress without being inhibited by the initial mechanics introduced into the game. So my theory here is what has happened is they have changed that progression curve. They flattened it out a little and moved it down from the yellow line to something like the red line. So in this particular example on your screen, where you were getting good performance at 100 OVR here, or 100 for I for this your player, suddenly it's become significantly less effective. And for the players who have noticed, like, oh gosh, these skills used to work great. I used to have, what is it, charisma and batting machine, and my batter used to do great, and it just doesn't seem to be producing the same level that he did before. My theory is that that in combination with this change has impacted how the skills are behaving. And so where I hear the comments, oh, yes, my pitcher's velocity needs to be above this level for cleaning up your mess to be effective, or something along those lines, I say, yeah, I think that's because what they've done is they've adjusted the curve, or in more layman's terms, basically they've nerfed us. And that's what I think has been going on. So, with all those things in mind, here's what I believe all of that amounts to. First of all, I hear comments about, this skill becoming good or bad or whatever. I don't think it's the actual skills. I think it's the adjustment of the growth curve, or that nerf, and the way that the numbers play into those skills that is actually taking place more so than skill adjustments themselves. Second, the OVR level, and we already discussed this quite a bit, the OVR level where Legend and Ace became ineffectual has likely raised. So that means previously you might have screened out these on your players, but the bar has been raised such that you kind of need a higher OVR player, and to achieve, or there's more room to grow your OVR before you hit that curve, and therefore Legend and Ace have had a little bit of life breathed back into them to where you can have them on a slightly higher OVR player before they become ineffectual again. And Charisma, Cleaning Up Your Mess, and Last Boss were basically also given an extended life by this whole change. Last year, I would have told you I don't believe in those as much. I think you should be putting your time and energy into Slugger's Instinct, Batting Machine, these types of things. But now I say, you know what? These still have high value. And before we hit that very top end of the curve, that's the point at which they are going to lessen in value, but I don't think we're going to reach that because of the way that they adjusted, or the nerf that I believe that they implemented. I believe they gave themselves enough room to where these skills will continue to be useful. That said, and I already mentioned this as well, Batting Machine, Slugger's Instinct, these types of things are more of a long-term play. So if we do ever reach the top of that curve, then these ones should remain valuable and less affected by that curve than the others. So that pretty much wraps up all the points that I wanted to make. I would love to hear anybody's feedback on this, if they've noticed these types of things, if this makes sense to them, or if you think I'm just basically spouting a bunch of crap. Let me know in the comments. And thanks, and enjoy your ranked play and various other activities. Bye for now.